Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life. A series of programs highlighting the social and cultural interaction between the worshiping and larger communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Area Conference of Churches in cooperation with KTBC. Join us now in today's Austin Faith Dialogue.
The visions of Christmas, as glimpsed in this carol. Sages, leave your contemplations, brighter visions beam afar. Seek the great desire of nations. Ye have seen his natal star. The voices of Christmas, as sounded in Paul Gerhardt's immortal lyrics. All my heart this night rejoices as I hear far and near sweetest angel voices. Good day. I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this Highlights of the Holiday on Austin Faith Dialogue. The visions and voices of Christmas come as a blessing across the centuries to people of all cultures and faiths. In our own community, that inspiration takes special form in the art and the music from the University of Texas. At the Huntington Art Gallery, the paintings and sculpture of the Nativity await our appreciation. But before viewing those works of the hands of past craftsmen, let us attune our spirits to the season with the song, O Holy Night, composed by Adolphe Adam, sung by Sharon Kenny. As these words and magnificent melody have so graciously brought us the voice of Christmas, the color and shape of art at the University of Texas will provide its vision. Our guide into the images at the Huntington Art Gallery will be print and drawings curator Jonathan Bober. Welcome now to the Medieval Art Room at the Huntington Gallery, and we're welcoming you, Jonathan Bober, as our guide to this art.
Thank you very much, Richard. Good morning and welcome to the Huntington Art Gallery's Medieval Art Room. And we begin this morning with a very fine marble sculpture, French, early 14th century, that depicts, as you can plainly see, the Madonna and Child. What's unusual about it in the history of European art, the sense in which it represents a departure from earlier works of art, earlier modes of representing the Madonna and Child, is that the Madonna is now a standing figure, a full figure carved in the round, holding a rather lively Christ child. I think you can see him squirming as he presents a rather oversized finch that is still, in the medieval language, a symbol of the Incarnation. But even the finch has its own terrific life. Moreover, through the Madonna's entire posture, there is a rather elegant curvature, but that is a curve that also suggests an animation, a real presence underneath this drapery, which now, contrary to previous earlier medieval art, begins to take on realistic characteristics. That is, it is recognizable as drapery, even though it is in this marble without any polychrome, that is color.
Okay, and not so stylized as some of the earlier art.
Precisely, precisely.
And what's she holding in her hand there?
She is holding some sort of fruit. It's rather difficult to identify precisely what, given that its detail or color have been worn away with time. It is most likely, though, a pomegranate, which is another symbol in the medieval language of the Incarnation, because within the pomegranate's extremely dry and dense exterior is preserved the very, very moist fruit, the moist and extremely sweet fruit that was thought to be, again, symbolic of life within death. That is the Incarnation. Once again.
The human touch on this is obvious in the face expressions as well. Is that
absolutely right?
Intentional? Absolutely
right. And this, in fact, both the Madonna and Child possess what is often referred to as the late Gothic smile. It's not truly a smile, though it suggests that to us. What it is an expression of greater openness as well as more elegant stylization. And it consists of these wonderfully arched brows, the smiling eyes, and I think you can see just the cut, the articulation of the eye suggests that, and even the upwardly turned mouth that suggests a greater openness, a greater gentleness, greater humanity. Again, a more approachable form of divinity.
And this was reflecting what was happening in the church and in the culture of that time.
Absolutely right. That is, as Christianity from essentially the early 13th century on begins to accept the needs and begins to phrase its appeal to the new masses that populate the newly formed cities of Europe, its art forms, like its forms of preaching, like every other form within the religion, begins to be directed to a larger audience, and therefore the appeal has to be more general, more human.
Well, we'll look forward to sharing with our television audience today other expressions of this same
Precisely.
form. Thank you for this. We now come to the second of the Visions of Christmas at the Huntington Gallery. And Jonathan, can you tell us about this?
Yes, this is in fact the earliest painting in the Huntington Art Gallery. It is an Italian panel of the mid-14th century, in fact probably very close in date to the sculpture we just looked at. It is attributed to a painter named Gerini, a central Italian painter of that time. More significant than the attribution is the fact that it is a painting, so that many of the same elements of the increased humanization, the greater accessibility of the representation of the Madonna and Child that we saw in the French sculpture are also the case in this painting.
You see certain parallels to what we saw first, but there are some differences.
Well, first and foremost, obviously, is the medium. That is, that this is a painting. And in fact, the revival of monumental painting in Europe dates from the 14th century. and is another manifestation of this same phenomenon, the desire that the church make the message, its essential messages, in this case the incarnation, more accessible to a larger public.
What about the figure at the bottom of this particular centerpiece?
Well, this is a figure in contemporary costume, and that denotes that indeed he is a person of the 14th century. This is the donor, the person who paid for this altarpiece to be created, most likely to be put on his family's altarpiece in whatever church it may come from. That has not been determined. His separation from the divinity of the Madonna and Child is indicated, of course, by this extraordinarily different scale at which he's rendered, microscopic, so that he doesn't interfere with the religious message, the strictly
And what about the figures on either side of this triptych, such as to your...
Well, this is a further difference, obviously, from the French sculpture, in that within the symbolic church, this symbolic divine realm of the frame and its gold background, appear not only the Madonna and Child, seated in glory, seated in majesty, but saints. That is, different personages who act as intercessors. They are figures that engage the viewer beyond simply the humanity, the accessibility of the Madonna and Child. They allow the viewer, would have allowed the contemporary viewer, to feel that his message was being somehow seconded and transmitted to the Virgin.
I see. Now, we have up on the top part of each of these panels figures that represent what?
Yes, and this is still typical of medieval art, of course, is the simultaneous narrative. That is, the scene is not of a single temporal unity, and here in these gables, to either extreme, one has the Virgin of the Annunciation, Gabriel, and on the other side, the Virgin receiving the Holy Spirit, one sees there, and at the summit, in the central gable, over the Madonna and Child, one has God the Father.
So as a triptych, as a threefold panel, we have a special way of highlighting this particular vision of Christmas, and we'll look forward to making our comparison with our next work as we move toward that. We come now to another sculptor, which I understand, Jonathan, dates from about the time Columbus discovered America.
Yes, this is a polychrome wood group from South Germany that must date from the second half of the 15th century. It's a very common type throughout the area of Central Europe at exactly that time, yes.
Okay, what are its characteristics?
Well, the characteristics are polychrome, above all, and the extraordinary realism now, the much more developed realism, that is recognizability of textures, the behavior of drapery, and you can see the wonderfully complicated but really quite plausible folds, and I think especially striking, the further humanization, a dramatic and even pathetic humanization of the figure's expressions.
Now, who are we looking at here?
Well, here too, compared to the earlier works we've looked at, the iconography has become more complex.
This central figure is who?
This central figure is Saint Anne, that is, the mother of the Virgin.
Oh, so this is?
Here at diminutive scale is the Virgin Mary, crowned, indeed, and here is the Christ child once again. So really what this represents is the Immaculate Conception. That is not merely that Christ is conceived immaculately by the Virgin, but as one strain of Christian dogma of the moment had it, that the Virgin herself was conceived immaculately by Saint Anne. Therefore, Christ's sin-free birth was preceded by the Virgin's sin-free birth.
So as representation of that doctrinal development of that time, we have St. Anne as the largest of the figures, and could you give us your interpretation of the look on her face?
Well, it seems certainly to our eye to be an expression of dreaminess or anticipation of tragedy. Certainly it has that pathetic appeal I mentioned a moment ago, which may refer to the inevitable sacrifice of her daughter in having to indeed, surrender her firstborn. And of course, the implicit tragedy, the tragedy that is essential to the humanity of Christ. So it is a complex theological statement, but again, the terrific importance as a work of art is that it's phrased in terms of this much more realistic and popularly and obviously appealing shape and form.
All right. Now, one aspect of this particular work is the gold color of St. Anne's garment. Is there a significance in that?
Well, obviously, within a darkened church of the time, a darkened South German church, let's imagine candlelight about this group and how the candlelight would have played off the gilding of the drapery and how that would have made the drapery seem even more lively, capable of movement, suggested that the figures within have the potential for movement of life and animation.
And gold as the representation of heaven as well.
And gold certainly as the celestial material par excellence.
All right. And we'll look forward to the color that we'll be viewing in our next painting. As we make our transition to this painting, I think we're jumping several centuries, aren't we, Jonathan?
Yes, here we're in the mid-18th century in Venice. The painter is Fontebasso, who is one of the more capable followers of Tiepolo, is the best-known painter of that
And the
group
title
time.
of this is?
This is an adoration of the Magi. That is, it depicts the moment 12 days after the Nativity, 12 days after Christmas, when the three kings reach the Holy Family. And indeed, that is what is depicted here in a wonderfully fluent style, terrific use of paint, also with a terrific animation and brilliant color and light that are all typical of Venetian painting of the time and the sense of spectacle that is typical of late Baroque art in general.
All right. And what is there about this that makes this such a valuable piece for the Huntington collection?
Well, it is the sheer quality of the painting, that is, the quality of paint on canvas, how richly paint has been laid down, how subtle the gradations in the modeling are, how almost electric the light seems as it strikes these very luxuriant draperies.
And it may be that the very brilliance of that and the luxury of that should be in mind as we look at our last painting, which is a much more simple design.
Very effective contrast, yes.
As we come to our final work of art, I have to tell you, Jonathan, that this happens to be my favorite of all in the collection of the Medieval Gallery.
I can understand that. This is a wonderful alabaster carving of the School of Nottingham, which is a distinctive English school that flourishes from the 13th and through the 15th centuries. This must be one of the later works toward mid-15th century, and it depicts here the Virgin and Child seated, still in the manger, with the three Magi having arrived, and here is the sleeping Joseph, here beneath the manger, the ox and ass feeding gently. What characterizes it in terms of style is obviously an extreme abstraction. Though it is already of the period of greater realism that we've been talking about, it reverts in many ways to a greater linear stylization, that is, tendency toward pattern. But in terms of expression, it's marked by a wonderful and really very moving humility.
All right, now this is what strikes me about it, is it's a return not only to an earlier form, but to the earlier meaning and substance of the Incarnation, Christ born into the midst of a stable in a humble setting. And how would you see this otherwise, as you've already started us in that direction?
Well, that is, the gestures are so conspicuous and legible, even from the distance of a camera. The faces, too, are of an exaggerated size and exaggerated features. The eyes have these exaggeratedly large orbits. That is all that make the expression immediately legible, and yet do not exaggerate or caricature any particular response.
All right.
There is this dignity, I would say, despite the scale.
And don't we find that this is, as people would come into the gallery and come to view this, feel something of the meaning of the Christmas vision that they might not have on the more exalted pictures that we've seen earlier?
I would say in many senses, yes, whereas a Fonte Basso is as much about virtuoso painting and luxury of stuffs and materials corresponds to the modern and slightly decadent sense of the holiday. This does capture something of the more authentic and humble and immaterial essence of the event.
We'd like to give you the sense of our appreciation for your being with us on this particular program of Austin Faith Dialogue, and would like to wish you a joyful holiday yourself.
Thank you, and to you as well. It's been my pleasure.
The sights of Christmas, as we've been able to view them this day, return us to the sounds of the season. Visions and voices so blending that we end as we began, with music. On behalf of the Austin Area Conference of Churches, I'm Richard Thompson, thanking you for being part of this special holiday celebration. May the spirit of the season be alive within each of us as we now hear Joyful Children, composed by Lee Holdridge and sung by Douglas Roach, and then Douglas Roach and Sharon Kinney blending their voices in The First Noel.
Is the heart so